What is up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News and presented by Sticks.com. I am your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Mike Augello, who covers the Buffalo Sabres here for us at the Hockey News, and David Alter, who covers the Toronto Maple Leafs for us at the Hockey News. And we've got lots to get into. We're focusing on the Atlantic Division today, so lots to talk about there. Before we get into all of that, do want to let you know we are sponsored by Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro-level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's Stix.com. Head there now and gear up. All right. I know I started by saying we are going to talk about the Atlantic Division today. Of course, we have two of our Atlantic Division writers here with us. But first, big news of the day, Trevor Zegras traded from Anaheim to Philadelphia. Just immediate thoughts. Mike, I'll start with you on the trade. Any part of it surprise you, or who do you think's the immediate winner here?
Well, I think Philadelphia is the winner because I think Zegras is a top-end offensive player. He has not thrived the way a lot of people have thought he would in Anaheim, and he needed a fresh start. The Flyers need offense. They need players who can play center. The question is Zegras a center? He's had trouble on faceoffs. He's not particularly good defensively, but he will get an opportunity in Philadelphia. And I think Anaheim just got draft capital in the deal, a 2 and a 4, and Ryan Poehling, who's a useful fourth liner. So I think it's a good trade for both, but I think the best player in the deal obviously is Zegras.
David, what did you think when you saw the trade?
I was surprised. I mean, Anaheim just got a coaching change, and I would have thought, okay, fresh set of eyes, something there. This is a type of player that someone like Joel Quenneville can get his hands on and try to maximize, but clearly that's not going to happen now. And I'm also looking at where he's going, where if John Tortorella was still there, I would have seen it as like this big clash of personalities that could have been quite explosive. So, the one thing we do know about Trevor Zegras is he's not afraid to speak his mind about things. Like I even remember when I was in Nashville and they had that bongo anthem singer, and he was like, in that first intermission, he brought up the fact that he was distracted by that, and just not something you would hear a generic first intermission hockey interviewer talk about. So he's certainly not afraid to speak up there. Different coaches in both sides. I was surprised. He is the best player available in that, no doubt. Ryan Poehling's a great player, but he's not Trevor Zegras. There's a lot of upside there, and I think this is Philadelphia just looking for an opportunity to kind of reunite him there with Jamie Drysdale as well, and kind of figure out what they can kind of do there.
Yeah, Zegras just seemed like a perfect change of scenery candidate, I think, in general. I mean, he's been injury prone. We've seen that this year, as recently as this year, and just kind of didn't have really a clear role to play. To Mike's point, is he a center? I think that if he can get to a point in Philadelphia where he gets into a rhythm, gets a little bit of consistency there, then, he really, hopefully for Philadelphia, can be the player that everyone thought he was. That's the big news for the day. Now we are going to shift over to some Atlantic Division conversation. Mike, we're going to start in Buffalo, so got to start with you. Obviously, no shortage of names showing up on or in the trade rumors from Buffalo. Guys like JJ Peterka, Bowen, Byram, more than that even. But as you and I have discussed before, Buffalo tends to have an issue, either whether it's attracting free agents or getting NHL players who won't block trades to Buffalo. So what can you sort of say about that? Obviously these names, the names that are in the trade rumors, are there for good reason, but, is Buffalo really going to be able to take full advantage of the trade market for these guys, knowing that they need NHL ready talent and they don't just need draft capital?
I mean, Kevyn Adams right now, if he's lucky that it's unlimited call and text because supposedly he's burning up the phone lines trying to make deals. And right now, navigating the no move and no trade clauses of players that potentially he's looking for is like navigating the Straits of Hormuz. It's difficult. It's extremely difficult because a lot of players have Canadian teams on their no trade lists, and a lot of players have Buffalo on their no trade list, and a team that has not made the playoffs 14 years in a row. It's not a destination place right now. When it comes to the names that have been mentioned by a lot of the insiders, I would say it's almost a guarantee that Bowen Byram is going to be traded. He's a restricted free agent. He's 2 years away from unrestricted free agency. He's a very good defenseman, and he didn't have a problem with Buffalo. It's just the fact that he's a left shot defenseman, and he's playing behind Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power, and both of those players are signed to long-term deals. So he's blocked in terms of being on the top pairing and being on the power play. He wants to make money. He wants to sign a long-term deal. I just don't think it's going to happen in Buffalo. I don't know about the Peterka situation. His name has been out there. I think it's a little bit of Alan Walsh selling his name and putting it out there in the media that he doesn't want to play here. Maybe he's trying to get a long-term deal out of Peterka, but his name has been popular. And, if he gets moved, it'll be a surprise because he's retainable for 4 more years before unrestricted free agency. They don't want to move him, but if he is so adamant that he doesn't want to play in Buffalo, they may have to move him.
David, I'm curious from your perspective on this, being in a market like Toronto, I feel like a little bit different than Buffalo in terms of, teams wanting or not wanting, or players rather wanting or not wanting to be traded there. So what can you say about this situation from your point of view?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, the one thing that Mike will attest to is that I think it's 15% of the season ticket subscribers are from Southern Ontario in that commute between Toronto and Buffalo. So depending on where you live in the Golden Horseshoe, even as a Canadian, you cheer for the Sabres. So there is that element of that. But when Toronto looks at Buffalo from the outside, they see a team that has not made the playoffs for a very long time and is desperate right now to probably sell some of that short-term future because they're stocked up with so much long-term talent right now to just bring in some pieces, get some short-term pieces in there that will help and show some progress. They're desperate for progress to show that all these young players are just going to strike and they're going to hit. They have a lot of deep talent in Tage Thompson, Owen Power. The list goes on forever. And at some point or another, they need those pieces that are going to get them over the hump. Jarmo Kekalainen's in there now too, which is another voice that can kind of identify different types of talent. Not sure what that's going to do in terms of the advisory role there. But, Toronto and Buffalo, when both teams are firing and they have a lot to play for, those games are more exciting than anything else. So that's a market that Toronto wants to see, a little bit of progress, but Toronto has its own issues in terms of, they see that teams like Buffalo and some of the other Atlantic Division opponents are starting to nip at their heels in terms of what used to be just the same 3 or 4 dominating teams in that division.
Well, that is a perfect segue here because I want to talk about one of those teams that could be nipping at the heels of the Maple Leafs, and that is the Montreal Canadiens. They obviously made some big news last offseason. They brought in Patrik Laine in a trade, and he now is entering the final year of his contract. Reports are so far that he has not engaged in discussions yet about an extension, but that's likely expected to happen after the draft. Looking at Laine, again, another guy, very injury prone, as we saw this year during the preseason. There were also some rumors during the playoffs. He was unhappy with how he was deployed by the Canadiens, and yet it still seems like maybe compared to, obviously compared to Columbus where he was previously, it seems like he's sort of found a place for himself in Montreal. Now, if you are the Canadiens, is it worth extending him, knowing where this team is and knowing, that it was a playoff team this year? And, do you think that keeping Laine for the long term is pivotal to that, to being a long-term contender? Or do you think they get more value in potentially trading him before the deadline this year? Mike, I'll start with you.
Patrik Laine has always struck me as sort of a one-trick pony. He's an incredible offensive talent. Defensively, he's inept. He's been that way for his entire career. The injury-prone thing, I think maybe he's finally shaken that off. But I think the way he was deployed in the playoffs is because they couldn't trust him on the ice in certain situations because they were afraid Washington was going to score. He's great on the power play. He's a weapon. But he's making $8.7 million. If I was talking to him, if I was Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon, I would be, giving him term, not a lot of term because he's, I think, 27 going on 28, but I wouldn't be giving him $8.7 million. I'd actually probably offer him less than that. And if he's offered that, he probably will say, no, thank you, and want to go in unrestricted free agency. And if that's the case, then they can use him as a weapon at the deadline and retain 50% and get something for him. He's somebody, Montreal has a tough time attracting free agents, just like Buffalo does. It's a different situation because Montreal is such a ravenous and passionate fan base. Some players love that, some players don't. So they will try to keep him if they think he's a good fit, but I think it's less than 50-50. He stays around after next year.
David, what do you think? Another guy too that I didn't mention, Mike Matheson, potentially could be looking for a contract extension here with Montreal. So what do you think about those two guys in their future with the Canadiens?
Yeah, I mean, going back to Patrik Laine, I think the defensive issue stuff is there, and it's something that the Canadiens need to see real progress on because he's had so many different stops and they already know what he can do offensively. But if I'm the Canadiens, I'm sitting Patrik Laine down and showing him those last 3 rounds of the Stanley Cup playoffs and the way those games were going and what it takes to win and succeed and excel. And they need to see a real sign of that. And so $8.7 million is a tough ask, even with the offensive abilities that he provides. So that number is going to be important. If he goes long-term and it goes a little bit less, I think the Canadiens would kind of like to do that. But yeah, Mike Matheson is an unrestricted free agent after this season. The big one too, even though there is the cap jump, is Lane Hudson will be in the final year of his RFA deal. And he's going to command big bucks. And so you have to allocate for who's probably, in my eyes, going to be probably the highest paid player on the team, like depending on the way that contract shakes out. So you look at all of that, I think they have to get a real sense of what number works for the defensive elements that someone like Patrik Laine is going to bring in. If it doesn't work, then they move them. Like the Canadiens were in a situation where they didn't expect to maybe make this kind of jump the way they did and had such a strong finish to the season that their priorities shifted. It's no longer buying low, and because you have the cap space now, it's a matter of, all right, this cap space now has to be allotted to some of our younger talent and players who deserve it. And really the question is, does Patrik Laine deserve it right now? My answer would be no.
All right. Well, David, I want to stick with you here because I want to ask about the Leafs, specifically John Tavares. Now, we just saw Jonathan Toews with the contract he signed with Winnipeg, a lot of bonuses, a lot of incentives there. Do you think that maybe that could be the way to go if you're the Maple Leafs and looking to re-sign Tavares to a more team-friendly deal? Because again, I mean, he's a guy who the Leafs presumably want to re-sign. He wants to stay there. He is getting up there in age, but there's been plenty of talk about how on the open market, he could get something similar to what like Brock Nelson did. 3 years, 7.5 million AAV, and he's only about a year older than Nelson is. So just kind of looking at that, and do you think that either that the Leafs will go the bonus heavy route, or do you think that maybe they'll try to do more term, less money? What are your thoughts on that right now?
Yeah, my feeling on the John Tavares one is they're looking to bring the cap down for sure. Bonuses would be nice. I don't believe he's eligible for it because he's only 34 and he hasn't missed long term, and or he's not on ELC. So really what it comes down to is spreading out the money with the Yanni Gourde, Chris Tanev type of deals. And that's where you buy some extra years with the hope that you can sell Tavares on the fact that, hey, we'll give you a lot more money now, but when you're 39, 40 and the body gives out on you, you got more money because you're not looking for these minimum deals for people to take a flyer on you. We gave you more money to buy out those years. I think that's kind of where the Leafs want to go with it. But I think there's a strong side from his representation being like, hey, we know you want to be a Leaf, but don't leave money on the table unnecessarily because you're still a former first overall pick. You're still a player who scored 38 goals last season. You can't start setting new precedents here just because you want to stay here. And so there's a sweet spot there. We just don't know what it is and where it's going to come down to. But nothing sharpens the mind more than a serious deadline. And I believe that between now and July 1st, something's going to force that needle one way or another.
Mike, I'm curious what you think of all of the whole situation with John Tavares. Obviously, a few different ways this could shake out, but what are your predictions for how this ends up going down?
Well, not surprisingly, when it comes to Toronto, there's a lot of negotiating in the media. A lot of the insiders are floating different scenarios. I saw one that says the Leafs are only offering Tavares $4 million on a 3-year deal. And it's like, I don't know how much I believe and how much I don't believe. I do know this. Tavares wants to play in Toronto. The Leafs look at the landscape of the NHL right now. They're losing Mitch Marner. Matt Duchene signed already re-signed in Dallas. Brock Nelson signed. If they lose Tavares in free agency, they do not have a number 2 center on their roster. Maybe they can trade for one, but it would be very costly. I think they're going to get it done. As Elliot Friedman said, the key word is creative. And I think, more term, like David said, I think is the way that's going to happen, like a Chris Tanev deal, a 6-year deal. I also think they're going to go down the road that they went with Jake McCabe. They're going to try to defer money, and I think that that's an option. Whether Pat Brisson and Tavares like that, I don't know. But I think in the end, they're going to get it done.
All right. Well, just a few moments ago, we were talking about guys who are entering the final year of their contracts and potentially could look to be traded at the deadline this year. One of those guys is Vlad Tarasenko in Detroit. So want to talk about him for a second. 33 years old, 11 goals in 80 games this past year. This is after he had 55 points between the Senators and the Panthers the year before. And the problem with a guy like Tarasenko is he's really not doing much else if he's not scoring goals. And so he's got 1 year left at $4.75 million. His no trade clause transitions to an 8-team trade list starting July 1st. So it's unlikely that a team would be willing to take on his entire cap hit, with the rough season he had last year. But if Detroit were willing to retain, say, 50%, it could bring the cap hit down to just under $2.4 million, at which point he might be movable. So, Mike, I'll start with you. Is Tarasenko, do you think that he's maybe primed for a comeback year, or should Detroit try to cut bait sooner than later?
He's an offensive talent, whether his, speed and his creativity hasn't dropped off, but whether he's lost a step, that's something that Detroit probably would have to determine. But they save more on a buyout than they do if they retain 50%. They save over $3 million on a buyout. They have 2 buyout slots. One is a definite. They're going to probably buy out Justin Hall, who was a horrible signing by Steve Yzerman. But Tarasenko, I think there's a possibility of him bouncing back. Offensive players are tough to come by in this league. But if they retain 50%, a team like Seattle or a team like Utah or a team like San Jose might be willing to take him. So I think there's a 50% chance he stays with the Wings and a 50% chance he either gets bought out or gets traded.
What do you think, David? Do you think he's a buyout candidate, or does he get traded, or does he stay where he is?
It's tough because I think Detroit is one of those teams I mentioned before that's looking to take the next step. And I guess if they find something that's going to help them get in there that's better than Tarasenko for whatever that surplus of buyout money or retention or whatever, then maybe. But I see a 33-year-old player who's won the Stanley Cup twice, once with St. Louis and again with Florida the previous season, and that could be valuable for the right mix, the right situation. So I still think that there is an asset there that if they hang on to and Detroit's not in the mix, that maybe with the space and whatever they decide to do, they can kind of figure out, okay, hey, if we're not in the mix, let's get some real asset. Let's get something for them. Like, you look at what was thrown around at the deadline last year, and I just see opportunity galore for someone like that with that type of resume. And as I'm all in this older player renaissance moment right now. And so that's the play I'm making for a team like Detroit, where it's like, now's not the time. I don't think you do it unless there's absolutely something where you need that space for. And then, if Detroit goes on a run, I think he could be a help. But if he doesn't, he could definitely be a help to another team. But I think the deadline is where you kind of move someone like him for a rental for some prospects back as opposed to right now.
All right. Well, you mentioned that second Stanley Cup that he won with Florida. So that's a perfect segue to talk about the reigning back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, the Florida Panthers. So they, of course, had their cup parade this week and all of the shenanigans that surrounded it, part of which included Sam Bennett saying rather colorfully that he is planning on staying in Florida. There was also talk about Marchand saying that he's staying in Florida. So, of course, that's been the big talk heading into the offseason has been, you've got Bennett, Marchand, Aaron Ekblad. All 3 of these guys need new contracts. Mike, I'll go to you first. Can the Panthers re-sign all 3 of these guys? My thought is you can pick 2. You can have 2. But do you think that they'll be able to get all 3?
I don't think they'll get all 3, and I'm sure Darren Ferris just loved that Sam Bennett said that shot all the leverage that he had of him going to free agency on July 1. Short of Bill Zito pulling a Mark Stone with Matthew Tkachuk, if Matthew Tkachuk has to have surgery to repair what occurred to him at the Four Nations and kept him out until the playoffs, I don't see how they pull this off. They have $19 million in cap space. There's nobody that I can see on their roster right now that they'd be willing to move out to open up more cap space. I think it's 2 out of 3. I think Marchand's probably the one that's going to go because he's the one that with the least amount of ties to Florida, and he has the ability to hit it out of the park on a 3 or 4 year deal and get paid like he didn't get paid in Boston. I see Ekblad and I see Bennett staying there, and I see Marchand going.
David, what do you think?
I also think it's probably only going to be 2 out of 3. I'm not saying it's impossible for them to do 3 out of 3, and there are situations where they can get all 3 if they divvy up that money, maybe go a little bit over. Remember, you can go 10% over the cap right now, so you have to factor that in, and you can stay there up until the day before the regular season starts. So they can just punt on everything if they figure out a number that makes sense for all 3 players to kind of stick around. And so, I do think that maybe Aaron Ekblad is probably the odd man out of the 3. more so than Marchand. I was on Mike's side thinking Marchand was probably the guy that pries loose, but the more I see the Stanley Cup celebrations, the more I see how much he's been an anchor for leadership on that team during this playoff run and the whole Dairy Queen stuff and just all the stuff that's being shared and what they're saying about him. I don't know if they can let him go. And with Aaron Ekblad, he's been around for a long time. It's been reported that he flat out rejected a contract extension last summer. Florida got Seth Jones, and perhaps they can kind of learn what kind of world that they live with if they can't get Aaron Ekblad on a number there, and then can kind of move everything forward. But I do think Brad Marchand is someone Toronto is targeting, and it would be perfect for what Toronto needs right now. But everything I'm seeing there, it looks like I don't see a situation where Florida can just let Brad Marchand go, just because he's been such a driver of everything when you look at where they were before the playoffs and how written off they were to what ended up happening.
And you wonder too, obviously Marchand much older at 37, but you wonder too if maybe with what he's done for Florida, if they can get him to sign a longer deal, more term, less money, just to kind of help them out there. So will be definitely interesting to see. The addition of Marchand definitely added an extra wrinkle into what was already going to be a busy offseason for Bill Zito in free agency. Heading over elsewhere in Florida, I want to talk about Tampa Bay really quick. Nick Perbix going to test the open market in free agency, not expected to re-sign. He's been a solid right shot defenseman for Tampa, and this is going to be a free agent class that is pretty thin in terms of right shot defensemen. So probably a pretty good move on his part, in the sense that in this market, he may get overpaid on the open market. Looking probably somewhere that he can contribute both on the penalty kill and the power play. Certainly no short list of teams that could use that. That's for sure. But Mike, I'll ask you, first of all, what does Tampa's defense look like now without Nick Perbix, and what are some potential landing spots for him that are maybe realistic, and what kind of number he might be looking for in free agency?
Well, right here in River City, the Buffalo Sabres have literally no right shot defenseman. Jacob Bernard Docker played in their top four. Connor Clifton is a right shot bottom pairing guy. They need players who can play with talent, which means play with Dahlin and play with power. Perbix at times did play with Victor Hedman and did not look out of place. Now, I don't think the Sabres will overpay him, but a 27-year-old defenseman, a right shot defenseman coming off a deal where he's making a little over $1 million, he's probably going to get $3 million on a multi-year deal, and probably looking for as much term as he can get. This free agent class, Ekblad, if he does hit the open market, he's probably looking for $9.5 million as a two-time Stanley Cup winner. After that, it drops off, and then you're looking, teams are going to be looking at, trading for Matt Dumba or Ilya Lyubushkin from Dallas. So, Perbix will get some interest around the league.
Yeah, in terms of teams looking for right shot defensemen, I'm going to throw Nashville into the ring as well. I know that they got rid of Dante Fabro, Luke Shen, Alex Carrier almost in one fell swoop. So definitely could be some interest there. David, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think he's going to get paid more than that. I mean, you look at the pedigree of where he played, where he came in from. Someone might make a mistake, but maybe he lives up to it. But right shot defensemen are such a premium. He's only 27 years of age, so it's prime for the home run type of deal where it's maybe he gives up more term to get that money. So it's like maybe it's 7 times 5, something like that, where, right shot defenseman at the very end of it, it's like, is he going to be a serviceable guy at age 33? Probably. And right shot, you need You need those guys. And when you look at what $5 million is going to mean in reflection of what the salary cap's going to be potentially at that point, with everything going up exponentially, I'd be surprised if a 5 doesn't start with that. And just as Mike mentioned, the drop off after him, that's really what it is. It's the market. It's the market that's been set. And, Tampa kind of did this to themselves too, where they've already had most of their lineup set. They traded a lot of their youth movement away. They're in pure win now mode, and they just don't have a lot of space. And so, this is the right time for someone like Perbix to kind of come in and just get paid, because he has not had that big money contract yet for the type of position and role that he plays.
All right. Well, wrapping up our discussion here, got a couple more teams to hit in the Atlantic Division. First up is Boston. And speaking of contract extensions, Mason Lohrei got 2 years at $3.2 million AAV. Mike, what do you think of the extension? How do you think this fits in to Boston's long-term plans here as they sort of go into this, what we presume will be sort of a retool on the fly situation?
I mean, Lohrei is a big, young defenseman with offensive ability, so I'm not surprised that the Bruins paid him. They also have had some injury issues on the blue line. McAvoy was injured at the Four Nations. Hampus Lindholm missed a lot of time last year. So getting him locked up on a bridge deal and seeing where he can grow, because they gave him more ice time than I think they wanted to give him last year because of all the injuries, but there's a lot of talent there. So it was a smart signing by Don Sweeney. And now after 2 years, they can make a determination of, where he is as a player.
David, what do you think?
I think it makes sense, just because I think this is more where the Boston Bruins are as a franchise right now. Like, I think they have to kind of see where Lohrei kind of fits in, and they're in a bit of a, do they rebuild? Did they strip it down the studs, or can they possibly retool with what they build around? And then they can kind of make a decision long-term on if Lohrei is going to be part of that defense core or not, or where he slots in. So it's really a bet on yourself type of deal for Lohrei. And I'm not surprised by it. Like, you look at where the cap's kind of going up, and he'll be right into free agency at the very end of it. I think he'll be like an RFA. There'll still be one more year of RFA, but he'll be very close. And so I think both from a team and player standpoint, they can kind of just see, like, if you're Lohrei and, you see the opportunity, but you also see a lot of these guys who you never thought would be leave that year, you kind of have to wonder, is this the right spot? They have the culture, they have everything. I think so, but maybe this is going to take a bit longer to win. And I kind of have to see. So I think it's a nice little sandwich spot for both sides, kind of figuring out where they're going to be 2 years from now.
Absolutely. All right. Wrapping up our discussion of the Atlantic Division today, we're going to end in Ottawa. We talked about these contract extensions for these more veteran players and what they might look like, how teams are going to have to get creative. I think one of those that falls into that category is Claude Giroux in Ottawa. And I think that, there's been reports. Elliot Friedman said that I guess that Giroux and the Senators were sort of battling about bonus structure with a potential extension here. So, Mike, if you had to predict what a potential contract extension might look like for Claude Giroux in Ottawa, knowing that he wants to stay there, but still not wanting to sell himself short, and this is, of course, now a team that he has helped get back to the playoffs. What do you think a potential extension might look like?
Well, he's going to want as many years as he can get, but at 37 years old, I don't know how many years Steve Staios and the Senators want to give him. I would say at the most 3 years, and it's going to be along the lines of what David was talking about with the Taves deal, and you were talking about with the Taves deal, where, maybe easily attainable bonuses that they can push the bonus over it to the next year. If they, they're not a cap team, they're never going to come close to the cap being in Ottawa, but I think, they're going to pay him for what he does. And if he's still a good offensive player, which he looked like he was last year, then I could see a 2 or 3 year deal with heavy bonuses in it.
Do you kind of along the same lines, David?
Yeah, and like I can understand the difference in bonus structure, because this is a very difficult situation to kind of look at, because if he wasn't 37, I think you could probably come to some sort of understanding on a short term or a few more years. But bonus structures are very difficult for a player like him, because he hasn't shown any sort of signs where, I mean, his goals were down, his points are kind of going down over the last 3 years, but they like a lot of the things that he does provide, and it's a tough one. I don't know where that one lands. A lot of it's going to be how badly does he want to stay in that market. Like, he made a big commitment to them when he went there from Philly before, or from, I think it was Florida before that. That's right, because he moved from Philly to Florida in that same season. And so making that his home and doing all those things, it's not unlike John Tavares, just a little bit older and not as potent offensively. So where that fits in, it's probably a Tays type of structure, but what's fair? And then does it become a grapple between, are you going to play me or not based on games played? Like, there's always that red herring there if you do that, like with Connor Brown when he had that performance bonus situation. So that's going to be a very difficult one to figure out, and I don't know if it gets solved before free agency opens.
Yeah, interesting this year. A lot of potentially precedent-setting contract extensions that could get done this offseason. That is going to do it for today, though, in our discussion of the Atlantic Division. Thank you, of course, to Mike Augello and David Alter for joining me on our discussion. Tomorrow, I'm going to be back. We're going to be breaking down everything going on in the Metro Division, so be sure to tune back in for that. But for now, thank you to both of my guests today. For Mike Augello and David Alter, I'm Emma Lingan. This is the Hockey News, the Wraparound show, brought to you by Sticks.com, and we will see you tomorrow.